welcome to African Voices platform. I'm your host tonight. My name is Chiwe Chihana, and I've got my co-host Enoch Karumba in studio. Hi,
Hello.
Enoch.
Hello.
Hi. So today's show is about the Windrush. Monday, the 22nd of June, marked 72 years since the Empire Windrush ship arrived at Tilbury Docks in Essex. It brought around 500 people from Jamaica at the invitation of the British government to help rebuild the UK in the aftermath of the Second World War. Tonight, we've actually got a guest from the Caribbean community. He manages SADACCA, and he'll tell us a little bit about himself and about the work that SADACCA is doing. Hello, Rob.
Hello.
Welcome to African Voices platform. Could you tell everybody about yourself, your name, and what you do?
Okay. My name is Rob Corterell. I was born in Sheffield in 1960, first generation from the Windrush generation, along with my brothers and sisters. I've done basically everything in my life in Sheffield, apart from when I went to University of Warwick to do my masters. I grew up on the south side of the city, towards Netherhedge, then moved around once or twice, and grew up in my formative years in Parsons Cross, which is largely a white working class area on the north side of the city. Right. But for the last 35 years, I've lived in Pittsmoor and lastly in Norfolk Park. I went to school in Sheffield, quite average education. Mm-hmm. I was one of those pupils who always had school reports said that, could do better. I was one of those kind of pupils. I worked in engineering early on. Enoch's laughing there. I think he got one of those reports as well.
Right,
I've been involved in community activity, community politics, community activism for best part of 40 years now, if not more.
Right.
First got involved in youth work in the early 1980s. Did youth and community work, teaching life and social skills and teaching people around racism, sexism, ableism, disableism, etc. All the issue-based work, as we called it. And then from there, I developed an interest in trying to develop my education. Went to university for the first time at 29 years old. To university, qualified at Hallam, and then since then, up until 2016, I had a career in criminal justice in the probation service as a probation officer, youth defending team officer, manager, middle manager, short time as a senior manager on secondment.
Right.
For this last 5 years, I've been the chair of SADACCA, Sheffield and District African Caribbean Community Association. I was involved in SADACCA from its inception. In 1985, Sheffield City Council gave us that building on Wicker, 48 Wicker. It was an old, disused building. It had been disused for many years. So it's
what was the vision for it? What was the vision for SADACCA?
The vision for SADACCA was to house a number of different projects that were working around the time. We had the Mary Seacole Nursery. Okay. We had a screen printing business there that someone took responsibility for. We had a photography and video business. We had the music studio, Bob Marley Recording Studio, which has an international reputation. We had adult education. We provided a safe social space there as well, as we have in previous African Caribbean clubs, formerly known as West Indian centres.
So it has predominantly been managed by the African Caribbean community. And in light of the Windrush scandal, what has the impact been? What are the conversations that are taking place in Sheffield specifically, especially with the way the government has responded? It's now been 2 years. Could you contextualize that for us, especially from Sheffield's perspective?
Yeah. Well, the impact of the Windrush scandal, to be honest, has not affected too many people at SADACCA. Or in Sheffield, because one of the things that we did in the late 1980s, we ran a series of clinics there which enable people to bring their correct papers along and got the naturalisation papers or the British citizenship. And that happened for most people who were in Sheffield at that time. There may be one or two, a few people in Sheffield, they'll be the ones that have moved to Sheffield in
more recent years, I suppose.
Yeah, from other cities. I know that there's a woman from Birmingham, for example, but she's only been in Sheffield a few years, and I know she has issues. But we were largely okay. Having said that, we are obviously concerned, and we have been talking about the scandal and how this come to be about, and people are rightfully disgusted, they're angry, they're dismayed, but not surprised, because the Windrush scandal is just one of many scandals that have happened to us of African descent, and it's just one of those things that you get used to when living in a racist country, and that's the bottom line. It's not a comfortable thing to say, and it's not a comfortable thing to admit, but that's the reality of our experience in this country. So we've talked a lot about some of the very positive work we've done in SADACCA in the early years, enabling people not to be caught in this scandal. But the response from the government has been fairly typical. And although the government have spent a lot of time apologising, and it was Theresa May's time as Home Secretary and then as Prime Minister, and then Amber Rudd was the second Home Secretary who dealt with this. Been lots of apologies and apparently sincere, but they've now gone and done the same thing with COVID-19, with the report that came out about COVID-19 about people like you and me who are more susceptible to dying from this illness. What did the government do when they get the report? They subvert the report.
Shall I just go to Enoch, just because he had actually a point of interest as well on the COVID-19. Enoch, just come in there as well.
Hi, Rob. Thanks for coming on this show. I think it's very important, we as Africans, we need to understand when this report came out, there was an issue where was predominantly, as the government put it, they put it as predominantly people from the BME community or the BAME community, as they termed it. But what we're looking at this report is not because of the health background of these people that's making them poorly or die in many numbers, but we saw a very big disparity in terms of, healthcare, housing, poverty, jobs, all these are issues which are not health problems. These are not health problems. If you have an underlying problem, whether you're Black, Asian, or white, you're susceptible to COVID-19. But if someone else has opportunities over yourself just because you're being Black, that cannot be put into one basket as the biggest cause of high deaths in BAME communities. So what I want to know is, yourself as a community leader or, as someone who's been around and seen all these things happen, the reason what came out as a hostile policy, we're looking at the Windrush celebration, but also we're looking at the policies that were enacted by the then government of Theresa May, being the hostile environment policy, which was about immigration, right? And this targeted a certain particular people, which were of African descent. So shall we say this was one of those systematic, act of racism that was directed, to Black people? What's your view or what's your opinion around that? Because I can see COVID-19, the hostile environment policy being the same thing.
Absolutely. And this is what we have to start talking about now. Now is the time for us to change and control the narrative, to change and control the terms of reference. Because what we know is whether it's the Black Lives Matter protests, whether that started in America or not, is irrelevant, because it's just irrelevant, because we're the only people that are just getting used to the idea that actually, I've never ever called myself English, and I know I'm only British by nationality. That's just some bureaucratic process. But some of us like to call ourselves English or Jamaican or Trinidadian or Nigerian or Zimbabwe, does it really matter? We are of the African diaspora, and we have got to sort of change in terms of a reference for us to start thinking and talking in different ways than what we have before. Because if we take either the Black Lives Matter, then COVID-19, then Windrush scandal, then what happened in Grenfell Tower, we can go all the way back to before slavery with European involvement. It's all on one timeline. And actually, I would even argue that the whole idea of Windrush, the whole idea of Enoch Powell and other politicians and business leaders and industrial leaders going out to the Caribbean and saying, look, England's got destroyed in the war, we need your help. I think that was a hostile act. Why do I say that? Because they basically created a massive brain drain. But it wasn't just people in Jamaica. There were people from other Commonwealth countries as well. Other African countries, certainly India and Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, wherever. And it created a brain drain to come here to get the mother country, so-called, back on its feet and thriving again, but at great cost. Because there are parts of Jamaica that's not moved on since slavery days. There are parts of that landmass that is just like a plantation. It's been unworked for many, many years. There are some people that haven't moved on socio-economically, haven't moved on in such a long time. So for me, this is all part of an hostile act. And we have to see racism for what it is. It's a very, very powerful poison. It's one, I call it England's best export and most effective export ever. They've exported it around the world. So we talk about what happens in America or France or Belgium with King Leopold or Spain, Portugal, Holland. But that's what England transported around the world.
Absolutely, Rob. Actually, very, very, very much in line, I suppose, with the current environment around the world. I think the arguments in Britain were that they were not complicit in this, but what's happening in America is definitely something that is experienced in the United Kingdom as well. Do you want to speak a little bit to that as well?
Yeah, you see, as well as it's been part of that great export racism that England have done, they're also even better at controlling information. They've controlled how information has not gone out. Many people in England don't even know how England were involved in the slave trade. They've got very, very little idea of their empire. I'm 60, I'm much older than you two. So me and your parents, we were raised looking at a vision of the world when a map of the world was 4/5 pink. And all that pink belonged to the British Empire. Used to be a saying, didn't there? The sun will never set on the British Empire. Well, it's setting rather quick at the moment. But people have no idea. And that's why people are now protesting about the road name change or pulling these statues down. I mean, personally, I think the statues and road names are a side issue. I think they need to be part of the continuum, but they're a side issue. They're not the real issue. But if people don't know that, is it Edward Colston? I know his surname's Colston, in Bristol.
Edward, yeah.
If people don't know that he was part of a royal company, he was the head of a royal company that stole 8,000 Africans and forced them into slavery. That's part of the narrative as well that we have to change. People say, "Oh, they took slaves." No, they didn't take slaves.
So what do you think? What do you think it is exactly that's preventing that education from being amplified more? Should the responsibility be on us as the Black African diaspora to bring in, because this education is definitely missing in the mainstream society, and people are talking about decolonizing education, but at the same time, there's an argument to be made about actually centering and literally naming slavery for what it was and the empire for what it was. Enoch, do you want to come in there before?
Yeah, because education, I mean, there is a dark history, when it comes to African history. And the reason why you'll never find African history in the curriculum in this country is because probably 80 or 90% is horrible, dark history around it. So they will never tell you the truth about Africa. Students here, probably the best thing they've ever learned about Africa is a Discovery Channel. And again, history will tell us what happened before and what's happening in present at the moment. I just want to know why. You've just touched on that, Chiwe, decolonizing education, people complaining about, the whole education system being changed, some topics being introduced in history and geography and things like that. But that's only a tip of the iceberg. You can introduce that. This generation, on the generation that behind that never learned that history, will never understand. So you're educating one part of the population and leaving the other part out. So, what is it that we as African diaspora can do in trying to correct our own narrative?
Okay, there are many things. The education system is one part. I started school at 4 years old and I finished at 16. And I could read and write. I think I'm reasonably intelligent. But I've done most of my learning as an adult, And so we know learning about our history is not just about what we're going to learn in school, because we haven't learned about all Eurocentric history through school. We learn it through the media, the multimedia. Hollywood in particular was designed to sell a story. The so-called Birth of a Nation, something like that 1920 movie. What they tell us about the so-called Wild West. Well, actually, there were many Africans who were freed from slavery, who went out to the Wild West, were promised 3 acres and a mule. They're still waiting for it. The Lone Ranger was a black man, an African. He didn't have a Tonto sidekick, but he was a real bounty hunter, And so there are many ways that we can criticize. We have many ways to do it, like Spike Lee, if you've seen The Five Bloods, that new movie of his. Have you seen it?
Yeah, I've seen it.
It's a great
I haven't seen it, but I've heard things.
Yeah, I won't say too much about it then, Chiwe, but it's a great movie. Won't spoil it. It's a great movie because, that's how we retell history. But it's very easy, until more comes out, it's very easy to dismiss someone like Spike Lee, who does make a massive effort to tell real history and real old and contemporary history and create a social narrative, like in Boys in the Hood. Sorry, not Boys in the Hood. What was his movie when Raheem was killed? It'll come back to me before. But anyway, and so there are many ways that we can create this history. And although we aren't in control of schools or universities, what we can do at this time, right now, in the middle of the Black Lives Matter protest, what we can do right now is to add to that narrative and metaphorically twist some arms to say, this narrative needs to change. Because actually, the Industrial Revolution didn't come up from the weaving loom. It didn't come up from that. It came from how many hundreds of years of free labor in the Caribbean and the Americas. That's where the money came from for the Industrial Revolution. We have to retell history like, well, Churchill may well have been one of Britain's greatest heroes. That says in and of itself about this great country. So on the one hand, he was one of their greatest heroes. On the other hand, he was a genocidal maniac. He was a eugenicist, the man that created the welfare state. So everybody in England would be able to read and write, have a reasonable level of health, have somewhere to live, and not be in poverty. They've not done too well with that. But Niall Bevan, the Welsh politician, he was a eugenicist. H.G. Wells was a eugenicist. These are things that are easy to find, and we've got to start talking about these given any opportunity, so we can start to correct that narrative. Because actually, the people in charge of these education institutions, we're not telling them anything that they don't already know. They already know this.
But they don't want to share it. They don't want it to be out.
They don't want it to come out. So what I wanted to say in response to what Enoch said is, they already know what the education is. What the history is. They know that our history in Africa was only interrupted by slavery and then became a very dark passage in mankind worldwide. It was one of the biggest Holocausts ever. Well, it's probably the biggest Holocaust ever. you know. And if not that, then the next biggest Holocaust is what King Leopold committed in the Congo. You know, at least 10 million people. So, you know, we've just got to get some perspective taking. But, you know, I just think there is so much that we can do. I don't think we have to worry about asking about what we're going to do. We have to worry about getting together and organising and having a strategic and process way of sitting down around, well, Zoom's the thing for the near future, sitting around the Zoom screen with someone who could like bring the skeleton of a strategy that is process driven, that comes up at the end with a paper on what we want in education, on a paper what we want in health. Because again, our health is not just about dying. Sometimes dying is the easy thing. It's that living torture of your mental health being jabbed at every single day. You know, we have a racist experience most days of our lives. Wherever we see it, it's an experience that ebbs into here. And for some of us, we can work with that. But also for some of us, it knocks us back and we don't know how to deal with it. We don't want to deal with it because we know it's traumatic. And it's our mental health that is hammered every day. And in turn, or as a consequence, our immune systems, and that's the biggest thing that's killing us, because our immune systems are low. People say, no, it's bad diet. Well, diet might be some of it if you're diabetic or if you've got high blood pressure. But
when you're speaking of, when you actually come into the topic of health, I have picked up that SADACCA was quite instrumental in responding to COVID-19. But that's, as far as I can tell, it's only become pronounced because of COVID-19. But when we're talking about mutual aid, our communities have always had mutual aid. We're always supporting each other as Black communities, but it's sort of become an in thing now because the white population is also becoming involved in supporting their own neighborhoods. Any comment on that work you've been doing?
Yes. I mean, that's a massive thing for me at QA. That's a massive thing because, you see, we listen to this narrative being drilled into us all the time, and then we become convinced that we can't work together. We don't work together as communities. We don't work together as neighbourhoods. Well, actually, we've always done that. We created that way of working because at one time in this world, there were only people that look like you and I. You know, we created those mutual, responsible ways of working. You know, that saying, it takes a village to raise a child.
We exist in that world. That's our normal. That's what we do.
But I think it's a little different now with this generation now. The last 2 or 3 generations, I think, is a little different because, you see, when I was a child in Sheffield, I never caused any problems for the police. I wasn't bothered about the police. I wasn't a criminal, but I wasn't bothered about the police, regardless, because you don't need to be a criminal to be involved with the police. I was bothered about my father. So when I was going out as a teenager, becoming independent, you know, 16, 17, 18, even into my 30s, if I was in and around Sheffield and I saw anybody from my dad's generation, I made sure that I behaved myself. Because I know that even in my 30s, I know that word is going to go back to my father. Yeah? But these days, times have changed. If you have a child now, metaphorically, you know, a metaphoric child, or imaginary child, and I saw that child doing something wrong and I went to that child might curse me off. Or you might play merry hell with me because I've spoken to your child because I'm a stranger. But that's what we used to do. And I have to check myself sometimes. But at SADACCA, yes, we've been part of that communal way of working. Latterly, in response to COVID-19, actually, we were part of a response by an organisation called BEV, Black Elderly and Vulnerable. That wasn't our organisation. I'm sure he won't mind me saying, but that organisation was created by a guy called Dave Campbell. He was born and bred in Sheffield. I know there's at least 2 Dave Campbells, but this one's born and bred in Sheffield. He's a very successful businessman. This was his idea of trying to give something back to the community. But because Dave was raised the same as me, he's the same age as me, he also knows and works from the standpoint that it takes a village to raise a child. So he had this idea amongst 2 or 3 of his friends and a couple of supporters. And then he reached out to a number of organisations, ADIRA, SACMA, Sheffield Mental Health Project for African Caribbean Community, and SADACCA. And as a group of us, we all put in people resources to take out food parcels to people that we knew were isolated. That's just one thing. Yeah.
Well done. Yeah.
One of the other things, well, I have to say, one of the other great things that we've done, and this started from the Caribbean community, I think it was largely the Jamaican community. In the 60s, we had a thing called Partner. Have you ever heard of Partner?
No, I haven't, but I'm also just going to tell you we've got about 5 minutes remaining,
Okay,
so I need Enoch to come in at some point. Yeah.
This is another example of how we work together as communities. You know, back in the 60s, our parents couldn't go to the bank to get loans, you know, to buy white goods or household items and things. You know, you moved into a new house, you couldn't buy a settee or a 3-piece suite or a fridge or washing machine because the bank wasn't going to give you a loan to do that. So we created this system called Partner. I'm not sure if it started in Jamaica, but it certainly thrived here. And what would happen, you might get 20 or 30 of you together. All pay one person.
A month and the next one.
Yeah, the 20 paying £10, that's £200, £2,000. So each week, sorry, £200. Right, each week, one would get that pot of money.
Yeah.
And we trusted each other so much that we kept, you know, if you got your money in the first week, you kept paying for the whole 20 weeks until everybody else got their money. But we have this crazy thing now where we say, oh, we don't trust each other. We can't work together. Absolute nonsense. We've always worked together and we always will. And if someone with this now, we just need enough, don't we, to move things on. And I think that's how we're going to get through these current issues around COVID-19, these current issues around the protests.
The killing of black people, I think let's call it what it is, the killing of black people by the police.
Well, yes, it's a state-sponsored killing, absolutely.
Absolutely. Enoch, I'll give you a chance to come in.
I was about, to come on that point, Rob, that you just mentioned about, back in the days when the community worked together, when people were, if Rob was poor or, ill or child is ill, everyone knew, they all came and supported you, even though they didn't support, in a financial way, they came and visited. There is an element of fragmentation within the community now, right? And we've seen it going on for years and years and years. The African community has kind of like split up in little divisions, here and there. And to be honest, if you had to ask any of those people that what caused you to move away from such a big organization, SADACCA, or what caused you to move away from, that community umbrella, of when you used to be happy, now you're sad, there is beef among people. So I want to know what is it that can be done now?
I think the first thing that we have to remember is, and even in our one of our heydays, pre-slavery, there was fragmentation. Because if there wasn't fragmentation, maybe some of us wouldn't have been passed off and sold into slavery. That's one thing. But our life isn't just about slavery. But the point being, there is no one community, no one church, no one city, no one country anywhere in the world that is unified. And I think that is one of the things that holds us back. We keep trying to drive this narrative that we're not unified. Fine, so what? Nobody else is. But we can get enough of us together to drive things forward. You're right, you hit a great point there. SADACCA is not used as well at the moment as it was done 10 years ago, for example. But we had concentrated on the Windrush generation there, and rightfully so, because it was created for them. But things and times change. Cultures change, gatherings of peoples change, the diaspora changes, and we have to move with that change. So what we have to start doing now at SADACCA, we have to start reaching out to communities that haven't traditionally used SADACCA. As far as I'm concerned, as long as they're of African descent, that should be your community hub. What would you like to come there and do and organise? It's that simple. It's down to what we want to create, and the
Rob, I
space
feel
is
like I
there,
have to
the
come
time
in
is
there
there.
because I'm running out of time, but
It's
would
down to
really
us.
like to have you back on the show and definitely to talk more about SADACCA, because we're a Sheffield-based show, much as we're broadcasting to the world. We're very much a Sheffield-based show and would like to talk a bit more about how we could engage with SADACCA as a community at large. So thank you so much for joining us. Enoch, closing notes.
Can I
Sorry.
just say, when the doors open again, you'll be welcome to come down. So give me a shout, and we'll show you around.
Thank you so much. That's nice. Yeah, appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Rob. And again, the conversation still continues. I wish we had more time. There's a lot of questions we had, but again, it's not the end of it. We need to talk about those topics and issues that make us uncomfortable to talk about. Until we discuss them, I don't think we're going to get anywhere.
Yeah.
Absolutely, it's having those uncomfortable conversations because there's so many to have.
There's so many to have. Yeah, we need to fix ourselves first before we wait for anybody else to fix us. So I'm going to have to close tonight. It's been lovely having you, both Enoch and Rob. Thanks so much for joining African Voices platform tonight. My name is Chiwe Chihana.